You wake up in a pile of something that you hope is hay, but your nose is already informing you otherwise. It's definitely not hay. It's warm, wet, and has that rich aroma of medieval disappointment, equal parts human sweat, pig manure, and despair. Your back is sore, your throat is dry, and your one remaining sock is suspiciously missing. Welcome to 14th century Europe. You are, regrettably, a street performer. No, not the glamorous, fire-breathing, guitar-looping kind who pops up in Venice Beach wearing tight pants and an ironic mustache. You are the kind of street performer who mostly juggles turnips to avoid starving. And spoiler alert, sometimes even the turnips don't make it. You don't own a bed. Beds are for people who pay taxes and have surnames. You slept in a lean-to, propped up against a tavern wall that generously leaks ale and body fluids onto the street every evening. Your pillow was your sack of props, and your mattress smells like betrayal, rats, and yesterday's onion soup, because it probably was yesterday's onion soup. And while we're getting comfortable with this charming new identity, now would be a great time to do the YouTube thing. So before you drift too deep into the medieval filth nap, take a second to gently smack that like button and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Seriously. No pressure. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing who's falling asleep to the smell of 14th century feet from around the world. Right. Let's begin. You're in a small town, not the exciting kind with cathedrals and indoor plumbing, but one of the thousands of squat little villages scattered across Europe like dirty freckles. The town square is a lopsided mess of carts, chickens, and angry people yelling at each other about bread and demons. You, naturally, are part of the entertainment. You are what's known, generously, as a gleeman or a jongler, depending on how pretentious you're feeling. In modern terms, you're basically a one-person medieval YouTube channel. Juggling, music, acrobatics, maybe some mildly heretical comedy if you're feeling spicy. But here's the thing. There is no fame. There is no fortune. There is only the vague hope that someone throws a coin at you on purpose. Usually, it's a tomato, or a rock, or a moldy crust of bread that somehow smells worse than the soup it came from. If you're lucky, it hits your face and you get to keep it. Today's performance? You're opening for a dancing bear with mange and an attitude problem. His name is Bertrand. Bertrand hates you. You begin with a lute song, except your lute has 2 strings left, and one of them is made of sheep gut and wishful thinking. You strum something that sounds vaguely melodic, sing about a nobleman who lost his trousers in a brothel, and hope no one reports you to the church for being too funny. Because remember, heresy is only a punchline away. People chuckle. One man claps. A child throws a dead frog at you, but in a loving way. Progress. You move on to juggling. Your props? 3 mismatched apples, one of which has a worm trying to unionize. You juggle anyway. The crowd murmurs with polite confusion. A drunk peasant yells that he's seen better juggling from his goat, which is both insulting and oddly specific. You bow anyway. Because you are, if nothing else, a professional. The day wears on. Your stomach rumbles. You've eaten nothing but a stale piece of black rye bread and the fumes from someone else's boiled cabbage. Medieval life, for all its incense and illuminated manuscripts, smells mostly like wet wool and regret. Street performers like you are bottom of the barrel. You're below the coopers, the tanners, even the guy who cleans out the town latrine with a bent stick and a dead look in his eye. But hey, at least you're not in the stocks. Yet. And now we must talk about the smells. Oh, the smells. It's 1372. Deodorant won't be invented for several hundred years, and even then, it's just vinegar and denial. The streets are filled with a bouquet of sweat, dung, old fish, and mysterious puddles that hiss when you step in them. You're fairly certain one of them bit you. But you're not just a performer. Oh no, you're also a traveler. Because staying in one town too long gets you labeled as a nuisance, or worse, a witch with rhythm. So you wander from village to village, carrying your entire life in a canvas sack tied with old shoelaces and desperation. You perform at festivals, market days, and occasionally funerals, if you're willing to mime sadness for an extra crust of bread. At night, you sleep wherever you can, under carts, inside barns, once inside a hollowed-out turnip storage vat. That was a bad week. It rained turnip vinegar. Your companions on the road? Other performers? Sometimes. A fire eater who's missing both eyebrows. A flute player who only knows one song and plays it badly. A contortionist named Oswin who may or may not be possessed. You stick together out of necessity, not friendship. Because the road is dangerous and audiences get rowdy. Also, Oswin sleeps with his eyes open and mutters in Latin. During one market day, you share a corner of the square with a tooth puller who performs extractions while singing dirty ballads. He's more popular than you. The crowd roars as he yanks a molar out of a screaming farmer and juggles it like it's a trophy. You try not to take it personally. Sometimes, local authorities require you to have a license to perform. A license. In 14th century Europe, it's a piece of paper signed by a man in a hat who can't read, but it proves you're not a criminal, or at least not a dangerous one. Without it, you risk jail time, a beating, or having your loot confiscated. Which would be tragic, because that loot once belonged to your uncle, who died from laughing at a joke about monks. You once tried performing inside a tavern. Just once. The ale was strong, the room was dark, and your routine involved balancing a stool on your chin while whistling. Halfway through, someone threw a candle at you. The stool fell. You chipped a tooth. The crowd applauded. You haven't been back since. But occasionally, just occasionally, the stars align. A nobleman passes through. He sees your act. He chuckles. He tosses you a shiny coin, the equivalent of a small fortune. You eat meat that night. Actual meat. Not rat who fell in the stew pot by accident meat. You celebrate by buying a new sock, and for a fleeting moment, you feel like royalty. And then the coin falls through a hole in your pocket and is eaten by a goose. Such is the life. Let's not forget the ever-looming specter of the church. The church does not like your jokes about drunk monks. They do not appreciate your impression of St. Peter with a stomachache. You've been warned, once, by a friar who smelled like sadness and cabbage, that your performances were unseemly. You apologize by composing a lute ballad about the virtues of silence. It went over poorly. You once tried to escape the street life. Tried to become a proper minstrel. You auditioned for a noble household by performing your signature act, interpretive dance about the Black Death. It was described as haunting and wildly inappropriate. You were escorted out by someone with a mace. Still, you perform. Because performing is what you do. It's what keeps you warm at night, even when the only applause comes from drunkards and livestock. You perform because, in a world filled with war, plague, and moldy soup, laughter is the only thing you can afford to give away. And sometimes, in the middle of juggling knives in a muddy square surrounded by geese and judgment, you remember why you started, to feel alive. To make people smile, even if they're missing most of their teeth. To dance with danger and possibly contract fleas from a bear. But that's tomorrow's problem. Because tonight, you lie down on your sack of half-eaten props, listen to the comforting sound of someone vomiting into a bucket nearby, and stare at the stars. The same stars that shine over kings and popes and people who have actual roofs. You, a dirt smut performer with one working sock and a questionable rash, share the same sky. And in that moment, beneath the distant glow of moonlight and manure fog, you drift off to sleep, dreaming of applause, of roasted meat, and maybe, just maybe, of one day being allowed to perform in a place that doesn't smell like goat. Sleep well, performer. Tomorrow, you do it all again. You wake up with a foot in your face. It's Oswin's foot. And Oswin, your fellow performer and legally questionable contortionist, apparently sleeps folded in half like a cursed deck chair. His toes smell like fermented barley and burnt regret. You'd complain, but this is the closest thing you've had to warmth in 3 days. So you roll over, using your half-rotted lute as a pillow, and try not to think too hard about the wet squelching noise just outside the barn. Spoiler alert, it's pigs. And they're peeing. Right next to your face. Welcome back to the thrilling, glamorous world of medieval street performance, where the word performance is generous, and the word glamorous is an outright lie. Today's venue? A midsummer village fair in the town of Lower Dunworth-on-Swil, population, goats. The cobbled streets are slick with unidentifiable muck, and the air smells like burnt onions, desperation, and an uncomfortable amount of goose. You have a show in 2 hours. No, you don't get a stage. You get a clear spot by the manure pile. Luxury. You've performed on worse. Last week you performed on a moving cart while fleeing from an angry baker. Long story short, never make jokes about someone's yeast. This particular festival is sponsored by the local baron, a man so rotund and glistening he appears to have been dipped in lard and rolled through a chestnut harvest. He enjoys two things, meat pies and fire eaters. Guess who's got fire today? That's right. Not you. Your torch was stolen by a monk who claimed it was too spicy for the Lord. You try not to take it personally. Let's talk about fire eaters for a moment. These lunatics, professionals, travel from town to town shoving flaming sticks into their faces, belching sparks, and somehow not dying. Mostly. You've met a few. One guy named Arnulf had no eyebrows and a missing sense of smell, but could light a torch with his own spit. He said it was all about confidence and goose fat. You nodded, pretended to understand, and immediately stepped 10 feet away. You once tried fire eating. Just once. The crowd gasped. The torch lit. You inhaled, promptly singed off your mustache and invented a new type of cough. The crowd applauded, mostly because they thought it was part of the act. You took a bite and quietly vowed never to put anything on fire in your mouth again. Except soup. And even that was questionable. Today, your act is simpler. You'll lead with a song, transition into comedic tumbling, falling over on purpose, maybe finish with a classic drunk nobleman impression if the crowd doesn't turn on you first. You rehearse in your head, trying to remember the punchlines that don't involve excommunication. Oswin, now fully unfolded and humming a hymn in reverse, offers you a prop, a pig bladder inflated with wind. It's your version of a balloon. It squeaks. You thank him solemnly. It's the nicest gift you've received in a month. Now, let's zoom out for a moment. Because while you may feel like the only human street performer condemned to nap in haystacks and dodge pig bites, the truth is, there's a whole world of performers out here, an entire forgotten society of jugglers, jesters, minstrels, mummers, fools, and people who pretend to be dead for a living. Some are musicians, traveling minstrels with dulcimers, hurdy-gurdies, and enough songs about doomed love to depress a field of cabbages. Others are actors, performers and traveling mummer troupes who reenact biblical stories, local legends, and occasionally heavily improvised love triangles involving Satan and a chicken. Medieval people love that stuff. Nothing gets the crowd going like a devil with a sausage. Then you have the fools, not foolish people, but actual professional jesters. These were the rock stars of the performance world. If they were lucky, they found permanent employment at a noble court and didn't have to sleep next to turnip carts. They wore bells, carried mock scepters called baubles, and said wildly inappropriate things to powerful people under the legal protection of, "Oh, he's just joking." You dreamed of being one. Still do. Of course, there's a dark side to it all. Like the time a jester in Hungary got executed for joking about the king's feet. Or the time a street magician in Paris vanished mid-performance. Rumor says he performed a disappearing act a little too convincingly. Turns out, not everyone finds sleight of hand amusing, especially inquisitors. Speaking of magic, some performers dabble in the mystical arts, which, in modern terms, means cheap illusions, sleight of hand, and occasionally guessing what number you're thinking of. In the Middle Ages, however, this was dangerous business. The church doesn't exactly hand out magician licenses. If you pull a coin out of someone's ear and they don't laugh, they might decide you're in league with Satan. And the punishment for demonic cooperation is rarely a stern talking to. It's usually fire. A lot of fire. But not the fun, juggly kind. You once watched a street sorcerer in Bruges convince an entire crowd that he had turned a chicken into a loaf of bread. In reality, he just had a loaf of bread under the chicken. Still, the crowd cheered. Someone fainted. The local bishop blinked exactly once and walked away. You took notes. Back to you. You set up your stage, a modest plank over a puddle of questionable origin. You've draped cloth behind you, painted with the image of a majestic lion playing a flute. It's supposed to make you look exotic. It mostly just attracts dogs. The crowd gathers. A dozen children, a few drunks, one merchant with extremely judgmental eyebrows. You begin. A jaunty tune about a knight who mistook a cabbage for his bride. The children giggle. One peasant throws a radish, and it barely misses your ear. Encouraging. You tumble. You recite a bawdy poem about a friar and a goat. You mimic the local baron sneezing into his goblet, which earns a scandalized gasp and a quiet tip of the hat from a passing cook. And then, it happens. A coin. An actual coin, tossed by an old woman with a face like a walnut and the hands of someone who strangles chickens recreationally. You catch it midair, almost cry, and discreetly pocket it before Bertrand the bear notices. Then you smell something burning. Oswin, in an effort to enhance your finale, has lit his own foot on fire. He's dancing. The crowd is stunned. You try to help, but Oswin yells, "This is part of it," and does a backflip into a trough. The audience roars with applause. You bow. You did nothing. Still, success. After the show, you share a meal, 1 meat pie, 4 turnips, and a mug of something that fizzes angrily. Oswin hums a victory chant in Latin. You briefly consider joining a monastery. Then you remember monks don't clap. As night falls, you lie down in the grass beside your sack of props, warm from the firelight, full from a pie, and just barely not stabbed by a jealous puppeteer. It's been a good day. Maybe your best. You think back on the others you've seen. A blind fiddler who played in 5 languages. A dancing dog named Pickles who earned more in a week than you do in a season. A pair of twins who juggled hammers and insults in perfect sync. A boy who could fart tunes on command. Honestly, the talent pool is deep, if deeply unsettling. But still, you endure. You perform not because it's easy. It's not. It's cold. It's filthy. It's dangerous. But in a world of mud and fire, superstition and tooth rot, your art, no matter how ridiculous, matters. It brings laughter, joy, distraction, and, occasionally, small rodents who mistake your tambourine for a nest. The stars come out. The fire dies down. A sheep bleats in the distance. Oswin snores like a bagpipe possessed. You curl up under your makeshift lion flute curtain, coin in pocket, bladder prop under your head, and let yourself drift. Tomorrow, there's another town, another square, another performance. But tonight, you sleep the sleep of someone who made strangers laugh. And in the medieval world, that's as close to peace as you're going to get. Good night, performer. The world may forget your name, but it will remember your fart jokes forever. You wake up with a toothache and no tooth. It's fine. That molar was barely hanging on anyway. You think it fell out somewhere between the puppet show and the punchline about the bishop's underpants. Honestly, in this economy, 1 fewer tooth means 1 fewer thing to rot. You consider it a win. Your mattress, if one can call it that, is a burlap sack filled with straw and hay, and what might possibly be a rat. You try not to move too much. The rat seems comfortable, and frankly, you could use the company. You stretch, crack every joint like a poorly maintained drawbridge, and rise into the dawn mist like a crusty phoenix in yesterday's socks. Today, you're in the big city. Well, technically it's a market town, but compared to lower Dunworth-on-Swil, this place might as well be Constantinople. It has walls, taverns, people who know how to read. There's a fountain, a stone one. You're not sure how to feel about it. On the one hand, it's a nice change. On the other, it's probably cursed. This morning, you have a single goal: don't die. Your secondary goal? Get a patron. A real one. A noble. Someone who can give you money before the performance. In medieval terms, this is the equivalent of having a Netflix special, except instead of fame and fortune, you get leftover venison and the vague promise of not being arrested for public nuisance. So before you get too comfortable in your hay nest of betrayal, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you're genuinely enjoying this long, confusing descent into the forgotten world of medieval misery. And drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's oddly soothing to imagine someone halfway across the world falling asleep to the sounds of historical foot rot and fire jugglers. Now, back to your day. You start your morning routine, like any proper street performer, by wetting your hair in a trough and praying no chickens are using it as a bath. You smear a bit of ash under your eyes for flair. You poke holes in your doublet to give it that lived-in peasant chic look. You are now ready to beg for favor from someone who owns multiple chairs. Approaching nobility requires strategy. You can't just walk up to a baron and say, "Hey, want to pay me to fall down in public?" You must perform patronage. Appear humble but not groveling. Funny but not too funny. Nobles don't like being upstaged. Clean, but not suspiciously so. You must look like an honest scoundrel. A charming plague risk. A lovable miscreant in tights. You set your sights on Sir Humbert of Clenchwick, a minor noble with a major wig and a face like congealed porridge. You've heard he likes jesters, strong wine, and things that make his rivals uncomfortable. You figure you qualify on all three fronts. So, armed with your pig bladder prop and a prayer to Saint Genesius, patron saint of actors and possibly bad decisions, you launch into a small, impromptu performance near the square. It's a gamble. You do a little jig. Recite a short rhyme about the dangers of marrying your cousin. Sir Humbert laughs. Success. Then you do the impression of the local abbot trying to pee in the wind. The crowd chuckles. Sir Humbert claps politely. He tosses you a halfpenny and says, "You'll do." Boom. You're in. Patronage secured. Now, let's pause here for a moment and explore what that actually means. Because the word patron might conjure romantic visions of wealthy benefactors, court dinners, and inspired creative freedom. But in medieval reality, it's more like being adopted by someone who owns you just enough to stop you from starving, but not enough to keep you from getting pelted with stale bread during rehearsals. Patronage is transactional. You provide entertainment, distraction, occasionally impromptu courtroom sketches. In return, you might receive food, lodging, and if you're very lucky, protection from the church, rival performers, and wild boars. Some patrons are generous. Others make you wear a chicken costume and shout Latin insults at passing monks. You once met a fellow performer who had to sing songs about his Lord's feet daily. He wept into his soup, said the worst part was the rhyming. But even with all the humiliation and uncertain hygiene, patronage beats the alternative, total vagabondry. Because without a patron, you're vulnerable to everything, weather, hunger, and the ever-present threat of being arrested for loitering while amusing. That's an actual thing, especially in places where the local constable has a complex about laughter. Now that you've earned Sir Humbert's lukewarm approval, you're invited to perform at his feast tonight. Which means, miracle of miracles, you will be indoors. You haven't seen a real roof in weeks. Your skin quivers in anticipation. You try not to cry. You spend the afternoon preparing. You wash your feet. You brush your hair with a twig. You polish your shoes with spit and optimism. Oswin reappears from wherever he was hiding, possibly inside a wine barrel, and offers to play backup lute. You decline. The last time Oswin played backup lute, a chimney caught fire. It's unclear how. The feast is exactly what you imagined, a noisy, chaotic banquet hall filled with burping nobles, sloshing wine, and food that's 90% meat and 10% other meat. There are pies the size of your torso, a roasted boar with an apple in its mouth, a tower of jellied eels shaped like a bishop's mitre. No vegetables. None. You begin to suspect vegetables are a myth. Sir Humbert sits on a raised platform, chewing with the intensity of a medieval woodchipper. He waves you forward. You begin your set. It's going well. The crowd laughs. Someone throws a bone, not at you, just past you. Oswin contributes a dramatic cartwheel that knocks over a squire. A minor lord chokes on a date and applauds with both hands. You finish with a duet of farts and kazoo, courtesy of a disguised ocarina and a questionable sausage. The crowd loses it. After the performance, you're gifted a blanket, a mug of something that smells like regret, and, miracle of miracles, a space by the hearth to sleep. You lie down on actual stone, next to actual warmth, and for once, not next to a goat. But sleep doesn't come right away. Because you're thinking about how many performers like you never made it this far. The ones who caught typhus, who got caught mimicking the bishop's wig, who starved, or were simply forgotten. For every jester who made it into a court, there were 20 more who never made it out of the mud. And still, they performed. 4 crowds, 4 coins, 4 crumbs, or just to hear someone laugh in a world where laughter is a rare currency. They made people forget their suffering for 5 minutes at a time. And that, in a medieval hellscape of war, famine, and relentless dampness, might be the most heroic act of all. You roll onto your side. The fire crackles. A nobleman snores like a dying trumpet. And for a moment, you're not a vagrant or a juggler or a punchline. You're a performer. And in the medieval world, that's just shy of magic. You wake up with your arm asleep and your face in a half-eaten meat pie. You don't remember how you got the pie. You don't remember eating it. You suspect it might have wandered over and died on your blanket overnight. Either way, you sit up, shake the crusts out of your hair, and immediately whack your head on the underside of a trestle table. That's right. You slept under the feast table. You're officially part of the furniture now, somewhere between scarf rack and mop with legs. The noble hall is quiet, except for the gentle snoring of an unconscious squire and the whimpering sound of Oswin trying to fold himself into a cupboard. He calls it deep rest. You call it a warning sign. Either way, you're both still technically alive and mostly uninjured. So, success? There's leftover mutton stuck to your sleeve. Your breath smells like garlic, cheese, and crushed dreams. You have half a gold coin under your tongue for safekeeping. And your right foot is mysteriously damp. You decide not to ask questions. Today, you move on again. The road is calling. Or, more specifically, the bailiff is. You may or may not have accidentally insulted the Baron's favorite hawk during your impression of noble creature's routine. It's fine. You were going to leave anyway. Definitely. Probably. And so you find yourself walking. Again. Through ankle-deep mud. Past fields of turnips, over hills that were definitely not this steep on the way in. A light drizzle soaks your already soaked socks. A bird poops directly onto your shoulder and you don't even flinch. This is your life now. Let's talk about plague. Because we've been skirting around it politely, but let's be honest, it's the giant, pustule-covered elephant in the medieval room. You can't perform in the 14th century without becoming intimately familiar with the Black Death and its less famous but equally repulsive cousins. You've seen entire towns emptied. Posters nailed to gates, God save us from this affliction, written in shaky ink. Doors painted with red crosses. Streets that smell like vinegar, smoke, and things you really hope are dead. Performers? We're vectors. Wandering, loud, semi-clean vectors. But here's the real twist. People still want entertainment. Even during plague outbreaks. Maybe especially during them. There's something comforting about laughter when the world is oozing and on fire. And so, a strange new form of performance is born, the plague ball. No, not a royal gala for microbes. A plague ball is a weird, chaotic, borderline terrifying mix of theater, parody, and public health announcement, staged in markets, on carts, sometimes even near mass graves. Yes, really. You once performed next to a pile of bodies. The applause was respectful. You've done more than one of these. You know the drill. Someone plays death, usually wearing a sack and a skull mask made of wood in fear. Another performer plays the rich merchant who refuses to bathe. Someone else, the sinful monk. You play the peasant who gets sneezed on and immediately dies. It's your most realistic role. There's always a moral at the end. Something like, cleanliness is next to godliness, or avoid the temptation of lepers with soup. The crowd nods. A chicken screams. Someone gives you a moldy pear. You call it a win. But let's not romanticize it. Plague performances are dangerous. Not just because of, the plague, but because they attract the wrong kind of attention. People laugh until they decide you're mocking God. Or worse, mocking the church. You've danced dangerously close to excommunication more times than you can count. One time you made a joke about indulgences and a friar threw a candle at your head. It missed. Mostly. Still, the crowds love it. Because medieval life is miserable. Even when you're not actively dying of boils. It's cold. It's wet. Have your teeth fall out before you're 20. And if you laugh too loud at the wrong joke, someone accuses you of witchcraft. Which brings us neatly to the next kind of performance, the pantomime sermon. Now, we're not talking about licensed church events. No, these are the illegal, barely tolerated theatrical interpretations of religious stories. Think, biblical fanfiction acted out by people who haven't bathed since Pentecost. You've played Moses. Twice. One time with a beard made of rope and a staff borrowed from a shepherd who may or may not have been asleep at the time. You parted a puddle. The children screamed. A woman fainted. You never got your staff back. These performances walk a tightrope. Too serious and you're ignored. Too funny and you're stoned. Metaphorically. Usually. The real art lies in exaggeration. Slapstick. Big gestures. Jesus trips on a fish. The apostles argue over wine. You turn water into ale for comedic effect. Nobody minds as long as you don't insult St. Cuthbert or imitate the Pope's voice. Again. Still, sometimes you can feel it. That moment when the crowd goes quiet. Not because you've bombed, but because they're really watching. Really feeling it. When the performance transcends the muck and misery and becomes something like hope. You treasure those moments. Even if they're rare. Even if you're standing knee-deep in cabbage water and wearing a halo made from old wagon wheels. That's the magic of street performance. It's temporary, fleeting, forgotten almost instantly. And yet, in that brief window, it means everything. You once performed for a bishop. By accident. You were mocking his walk, not knowing he was watching. He laughed, genuinely laughed, then gave you a coin and said, "Do it again, but make the hat bigger." You obliged. That's how you ended up with a 5-foot-tall mitre made of straw. It caught fire later that week. Still worth it. Sometimes you find work with guilds. Not often, they're usually too focused on rules, structure, and keeping weirdos like you out. But occasionally, a guild will hire performers for festivals or parades. You play the part of a symbolic vice or virtue, depending on your hair length and ability to juggle poultry. The pay is low, the crowds are rowdy, and you're often mistaken for livestock, but it's honest work. You're once hired as greed. You wear a hat full of coins and yell, "Mine," every few seconds. You get hit with several cabbages. You save one for lunch. And let's not forget the festivals. The big ones. Saints' days. Royal weddings. Random Tuesdays someone decided were holy. That's when towns erupt into performance. Jugglers. Acrobats. Singers. Sword swallowers. Dancers dressed as demons. Dancing actual demons, if you believe the rumors. You live for those days. The music. The chaos. The laughter. You once shared a stage with a woman who tamed bees using only humming. She wore gloves made of wax and smelled like hope. You fell in love instantly. She left that night on a stolen mule. You wrote a song about it. It's mostly buzzing noises. But for all the joy and chaos, there's always danger. Not just physical, but spiritual. You're always one joke away from blasphemy. One tumble away from a broken rib. One unlucky plague victim away from an impromptu quarantine. Still, you keep performing. Not because it's safe. Not because it pays well, it doesn't. But because it's necessary. In a world full of death and dirt, laughter is the one thing that makes you feel alive. Even if it's just for a moment. You reach the next town by sundown. There's a small crowd gathered near the church steps. A fiddler plays a mournful tune. A boy juggles apples. A woman shouts verses from a scroll. You take your place near a barrel and start tuning your lute with the precision of a drunk monk. Tomorrow, you'll perform again. Maybe you'll make someone laugh. Maybe you'll get a coin. Maybe you'll just get rained on. But tonight, under the fading sky and the smell of stewed lentils, you feel something rare. Hope. The show must go on. Even if your pants don't. You wake up in a pig trough. Not metaphorically. Not figuratively. Not even dramatically. You are literally in a pig trough. There is a pig in it. She seems annoyed. Possibly jealous. You roll over, groan like a dying accordion, and realize you're wearing someone else's boots. Not better boots. Just different. Slightly wetter. One of them has a turnip stuffed in the toe, like a makeshift orthotic. You vaguely remember last night's festival. There was singing. Juggling. A game involving blindfolds and poultry that was definitely not church-approved. Oswin tried to teach a goose to dance. You recall shouting, "This is art," right before a barrel exploded. Again. A pretty standard evening, really. You sit up, brush hay and resentment from your cloak, and take in your surroundings. Mud. Smoke. The distant sound of a lute in distress. And the unmistakable odor of old onions and civic disappointment. Yes, you're in a guild town. Welcome to another exciting chapter in your career as a street performer, navigating the bureaucracy of medieval artistic institutions. Or, more specifically, trying not to get kicked in the face by a man in a funny hat because you dared to perform outside of regulations. See, unlike the delightful anarchy of the open road, cities, especially prosperous ones, have rules. And one of those rules is that if you want to perform in the streets, squares, or near any moderately interesting puddle, you need the blessing of the local guild. Yes, there are performance guilds. And no, they don't make sense. A guild, if you've somehow managed to avoid this mess of a system until now, is a medieval version of LinkedIn, but with more hats and fewer privacy controls. They exist to regulate trade, protect standards, and make sure nobody without a license tries to sell a mutton pie or sing a ballad about turnip theft. There are craftsmen's guilds, blacksmiths, weavers, carpenters. There are merchant guilds, people who wear velvet and say "ye" a lot. And then there are the guilds of players and minstrels, which, despite the fun name, are about as welcoming as a tax collector with a toothache. You approach the guild hall, a large, overly ornate building that looks like it's trying too hard. Outside, a mun in a robe is shouting at a dog. Classic. You knock. A panel opens. A pair of suspicious eyes peer out. What's your skill? The eyes bark. Falling down while singing, you reply. A pause. Accepted, the voice says. If you pay the fee. Yes, the fee. This is the medieval guild system in all its glory. If you want to legally perform in town, you must register with the local Players Guild. Pay a fee that is suspiciously close to all of your money. Prove your skill in a public trial performance judged by 3 old men who smell like pipe smoke and trauma. Swear a series of oaths. To whom? Unclear. Possibly to Saint Genesius, possibly to Aeneal. It changes town by town. Not anger the church, nobility, constables, or anyone's goats during your performance. Naturally, you do what any performer in your position would do. You bluff. You claim you're already licensed by the Guild of Minstrels in York. You throw in some exaggerated hand gestures. You drop a fake name, Godric the Melodious. You pretend you're part of a traveling cultural exchange program between noble houses, or possibly a one-man morality play sponsored by monks. They don't buy it. You end up paying the fee. 2 pennies and your remaining dignity later, you're officially registered. They give you a token. It looks like someone sneezed on a coin and then hammered it with disappointment. But it's proof. You can now perform in town square, legally, for at least 2 days. After that, it resets. Of course it does. You take your place in the market. The performance is medium. A few chuckles. 1 child cries. A woman tries to sell you a pie mid-routine. Classic. Still, you get a few coins. One man gives you half a fish. Oswin, bless him, plays backup lute again. He's improved slightly. Only 1 string breaks this time. You wrap the show with your signature move, the drunken abbot's collapse. It involves fake wine, real stumbling, and a dramatic fall into a strategically placed cabbage cart. The crowd gasps. The cabbage vendor screams. A woman claps once, very slowly. You bow. You limp away. But behind the scenes, you're being watched. Because here's the truth, guild life isn't just rules and bureaucracy. It's politics. Performers are like wolves. Or feral cats. Or feral cats pretending to be wolves. They form cliques, rivals, and secret hierarchies. Some jugglers hate mimes. Some dancers hate fire breathers. Everybody hates Oswin's lute. You're approached by a tall man with a painted face and a hat taller than his dignity. He calls himself Gervase the Graceful, but you suspect his real name is probably Reginald. He speaks with a nasal tone and asks, "Do you do weddings?" You lie. Constantly. He nods. You'll fit in. You've just been recruited into a performance troupe. This is a big deal. Troupes have power, influence, sometimes even matching cloaks. They're more structured than solo performers, better connected, and occasionally, they don't sleep in puddles. You're introduced to the rest of the group. Adelina, tightrope walker, amateur herbalist, and professional eye roller. Frere Peep, a bald monk who left the abbey to pursue interpretive dance. Morton, mute, but communicates entirely through mime. Also terrifying. Gervase, of course, leader, prima donna, wears bells on everything. The troupe has a gig at a wedding tomorrow. Nobility, big money, big expectations. You're in charge of comedic relief. Because of course you are. You prepare your best routines, chicken impressions, riddles, a song about marriage called The Chains That Clink. Wedding day comes. It is, predictably, a disaster. The bride hates jokes. The groom mistakes your performance for an omen. Oswin accidentally releases a cage of doves before the ceremony and they attack the priest. You trip during your skit and knock over a table of oysters. Morton mimes sorrow for 3 hours straight. You're paid in salt and regret. Still, the troupe likes you. You didn't die, which is apparently the bar. You stick with them for a while, traveling from town to town, feast to feast, pretending you're professionals. And for a while, it works. You get coin. You get beds. You get fan letters. Well, one fan letter from a child named Edwin who liked your goat dance. You treasure it. But even troop life has limits. One night, you're stopped at a border checkpoint. The local baron doesn't allow unauthorized theatricals. You're thrown in a holding pen with a juggler from Flanders and a man who claims he can talk to fish. You spend the night inventing a new form of performance called muddle theater. It involves mud and yelling. Eventually, the baron relents. You're released. But something changes. You begin to realize that being a medieval street performer isn't about climbing the ladder. There is no ladder. The ladder's on fire. You're climbing a rope made of sausages and it's tied to a goat. You don't do this for fame, or fortune, or even a consistent dinner. You do it because the world is falling apart. And if you can make someone laugh, or forget their problems, or just not think about the smell of the river for 5 minutes, then maybe you've done something worthwhile. You fall asleep that night under the stars, next to your troupe, with your head on a stolen cloak and your dreams filled with applause. Not roaring, thunderous applause. Just enough to keep you going. You'll wake up tomorrow in another town, another square, another market where someone might throw a radish at your head. And you'll do it all again. Because this is the forgotten world of medieval street performers. And forgetting it would be the biggest tragedy of all. You wake up to church bells. But not the kind of pleasant, dreamy, film score bells you might associate with some misty morning in a European fairy tale. No, these are medieval bells. Real bells. Big, angry, clanging metal discs of judgment, rung by a man who's probably in a bad mood and hasn't eaten anything but lentils and spite for 3 days. You groan. Roll over. Smack your head into a communion bench. You're in a church. Why? Well, last night was a little fuzzy after the performance. Someone in the crowd gave you a drink called St. Winifred's Whispers. It tasted like fermented regret and made your ears tingle. Next thing you remember, you were loudly reenacting the life of St. Lawrence, the one who was grilled alive, using a stolen grate and some onions. People clapped. You blacked out. Now you're here. Congratulations. You may be the first street performer in history to be excommunicated before sunrise. A monk steps over your leg. Doesn't even flinch. He's seen worse. You gather your things, 1 crack jug, 3 beans, a lute string, no lute, and half a puppet named Jeffrey, and sneak outside like a raccoon leaving a costume party. The sun is already up. You squint. There's a line of peasants waiting to get into the church for a relic viewing. Today's relic? Supposedly the toe of Saint Agatha. Suspiciously fresh-looking. And suddenly, it hits you, you're not just sleeping in churches. You're performing in their shadows. Which brings us to the single most complicated part of being a medieval entertainer, the church. Now, let's be clear. The church is everywhere. It's the state. It's the school. It's the court. It's the entertainment board, the fashion police, and the emergency weather report, all wrapped up in a single massive institution that mostly communicates through chanting, incense, and passive-aggressive Latin. The church has very strong opinions about performers. And by opinions, I mean a complicated cocktail of suspicion, theological debates, and occasional imprisonment. Let's break it down. There are 3 types of churchmen in relation to street performers. The grudging approvers, usually rural clergy who understand that laughter is useful, especially when half their congregation can't read. These are the monks who might let you perform a morality play in the courtyard, as long as you keep the jokes clean and the devils clothed. The openly hostile, usually bishops or fanatical friars who believe entertainment is a gateway to sin, vice, and dancing. These are the types who write angry letters to the Pope about jongleur. Sometimes they write entire treatises. One French abbot described minstrels as servants of Satan who juggle away the souls of men. Cheerful. The secret fans, these are my favorites. High-ranking clergy who claim to hate performances, but always happen to accidentally walk by just as you're about to start. They never smile, but they linger for the entire show. They often tip in cheese. You've met all 3. And unfortunately, you're about to meet a 4th. You arrive in a small town just outside Rouen. The local festival is called St. Crispin's Cheer, which sounds joyful, but mostly involves large vats of ale and slightly aggressive singing. You set up your puppet theater near the old fountain and start your show. Jeffrey the puppet is back, now with a new head card from a potato. The routine is going well. Children are laughing. Someone throws a pear. Then, for your big finale, you reenact the trial of St. Peter. It's all in good fun. Jeffrey plays Peter. You do a ridiculous Roman accent. There's a bit where a chicken interrupts the judgment, and you say, he's denying 3 times, but we're denying quality theater. The crowd roars. But in the back, a Mun crosses his arms. He's wearing black robes. He is a Dominican inquisitor. Oh, no. He approaches. You bow. Jeffrey bows too. He is not amused. Are you mocking the apostle? He asks in a voice like boiled vinegar. No, you say. I'm honoring him through humorous spiritual engagement. The Dominican stares at you. For a long time. You start sweating. Oswin backs away slowly. The puppet slumps in shame. Then, miraculously, the inquisitor says, "Do it again." Wait, what? You freeze. He insists. The part with the chicken. And so you do it again. He watches, arms folded. No smile. Not even a twitch. Then, at the end, he mutters, blasphemous, but accurate, and walks away. You're safe. For now. But you've learned an important lesson. The church doesn't like being mocked, but it also really likes accuracy. Which leads you to a new chapter in your career, religious storytelling. Yes, it turns out that in some towns, the only way you're allowed to perform publicly is if your show contains at least 1 saint, 2 morals, and a strong anti-devil stance. These shows are called miracle plays or mystery plays, and they're essentially medieval Netflix specials, produced by guilds, performed in the open air, and filled with drama, symbolism, and occasional heresy. You get cast in a mystery play, in York. You play Cain. Your job is to murder Abel, dramatically, in front of 200 people and a bishop. You use a fake club made of painted wood and scream, "Why art thou favored, brother?" before fake stabbing him with a turnip. The crowd goes wild. You later find out that your performance has sparked a theological debate about whether Cain's club was symbolic of jealousy or just a really heavy stick. You feel proud and deeply confused. This is the paradox of being a medieval performer. You are both celebrated and condemned, hired to entertain the masses, yet accused of corrupting their souls, invited to play for abbots, then chased out by priests. You walk a tightrope strung between salvation and sin, and sometimes that tightrope is on fire. Still, you learn to adapt. You memorize psalms. You sprinkle your shows with Latin phrases that may or may not be accurate. You start opening your puppet skits within the year of our Lord, blah blah blah, just to be safe. You also develop a collection of safe stories. The time St. George killed a dragon. You use a goose. The temptation of St. Anthony. You act out the demons using socks. The martyrdom of St. Cecilia. You pretend to play an invisible organ, dramatically. The trick is to perform just close enough to reverence that no one throws you in a ditch, but just funny enough that the kids don't start crying. Some towns even hire you to perform at church festivals. You do nativity plays with Real Chic. You get trampled once. Oswin, somehow, ends up playing baby Jesus. Twice. He's small and can't say no. But eventually, your luck runs out. In a town near Cologne, during Lent, you perform an innocent skit about a monk who eats too many beans and confesses to a chicken. You think it's lighthearted. The audience laughs. The local priest does not. He reports you to the bishop. You are summoned. And this, dear performer, is where your career very nearly ends. Because bishops have power. And this one is wearing a hat that's basically a divine traffic cone. He lectures you for an hour about decorum, theology, and the dangers of anthropomorphized poultry. Then he pauses and asks if you can do the voice of the chicken again. You do. He chuckles. You're forgiven. But barely. You leave town with a renewed sense of caution and a chicken puppet named Peter Cluck. You never perform him in Lent again. Night falls. You and Oswin find shelter under a bridge. The stars blink above you like tiny lanterns held by bored angels. You lie back, arms behind your head, and stare at the heavens. How did it go so wrong? Oswin asks. You sigh. We mocked a martyr using a vegetable. Silence. But they laughed, he says. You nod. And that, really, is the secret. In a world of rules, terror, and plague, if you can make someone laugh, even briefly, then maybe you've done something divine. Maybe. You close your eyes. Tomorrow, another town. Another church. Another chance to walk the line between comedy and condemnation. But tonight, you dream of saints, of crowds, of laughter that echoes through the nave of history, and of one very judgmental chicken. You wake up to the sound of someone vomiting into a bucket made of wood, hope, and poor decisions. It's Oswin. He's fine. Just had a bit too much of something called the black ale, which, judging by the smell, is equal parts beer and horse insult. His head is inside a bucket. His feet are in a chicken coop. And somehow, he's wearing your trousers. You sigh. Sit up. Brush straw from your face. Look around. You're in a tavern. Of course. The ceiling is low. The floor is sticky. The walls are decorated with antique stains. There are at least 3 dogs inside, one of which is possibly a person. The air smells like roasted onion, ale, damper, and someone's lost ambition. This, dear listener, is the glamorous life of the traveling entertainer. No stage. No dressing room. Just taverns, bridges, barns, and the occasional regrettable hayloft. You are the star of a one-man, ever-moving show that nobody officially invited, but which everyone complains about if you don't do it exactly the way they remember. And last night? Last night was lively. The show started like any other, music, jokes, a juggling bit involving hot turnips. But somewhere in the middle of your dance of the dung collector, a local nobleman's son decided to join the performance. By join, of course, we mean he shouted something rude about your parentage, threw a bread roll, and tried to punch Oswin, who responded by biting his finger and yelling, "I'm an orphan, sir." A fight broke out. Benches were flipped. Ale was spilled. A lute was broken. A nobleman's son was humiliated. And that, in the medieval world, is roughly equivalent to kicking a bishop in the incense burner. Which is why you're now hiding in the tavern storage room behind 2 barrels of pickled eels and a rather aggressive goose named Bernadette. It's time to talk about scandal, status, and why being a street performer was also a full-time job and not getting stabbed in the liver. Because unlike the gleaming romanticized vision of traveling bards and gallant troubadours, the actual medieval performer was often little more than one poorly timed joke away from permanent exile or spontaneous sword insertion. Let's start with status. You don't have any. In fact, you are technically a vagabond, which is a polite way of saying a breathing inconvenience to the authorities. Depending on where you are, you might be tolerated, taxed, shunned, whipped, or hired to entertain the mayor's cousin's wedding guests and then not paid. The laws vary wildly. Some towns require you to have a license to perform, issued by the local guild, bishop, or overlord du jour. Others just want a bribe. And some places, especially in the Holy Roman Empire, have entire bylaws dedicated to the removal of itinerant jesters, which sounds like a terrible B-side album from a medieval punk band. And let's not forget the noble classes. To them, you are either an amusing curiosity, a disgraceful lowlife, someone who must never make eye contact with their horse. The noble son from last night's performance? He's the 3rd son of a minor lord who thinks poetry is something you beat servants with. He didn't like the way you rhymed baron with flatulent parsnip. He took offense. And in medieval times, offense is often a prelude to drawn sword. Which brings us to the tavern duel. It's not as romantic as it sounds. There are no gloves thrown, no measured paces, no dramatic soliloquies before death. No, in reality, it's a lot of, "What did you say about my mother? I said your lute playing is as limp as your ankles. Take that back." Stab noises. These spontaneous medieval tavern fights are known as a phrase, and they happen often enough that some towns have specific ordinances about weapon-free zones in and around taverns. Doesn't stop anyone. Because when ale meets pride, the sword comes out faster than a tax collector in Lent. As a performer, your job is to entertain, not enrage. But the line between the two is a blur and often depends entirely on the mood of the crowd. A joke about the king's beard might kill in one village and get you actually killed in another. So you learn to read the room. Too much laughter? A knight might think you're mocking him. Too little? The innkeeper might short your pay. Wrong gesture? Someone might accuse you of casting spells. Right gesture, but too enthusiastically? You could be accused of witchcraft. Which, yes, also happened. Let's say you're good with sleight of hand. You can make coins disappear. People clap. Someone offers you a chicken. Then someone else says, wait, that's not natural. Next thing you know, you're being doused with holy water by an overzealous apothecary and someone's shouting about how you turned their cousin's teeth into beetles. The church has opinions on magic. Spoiler, they're not great. Even if you're just doing harmless tricks, the risk of being labeled a heretic or sorcerer is real. Especially if your act includes puppets with moving eyes, fire-breathing, talking animals even if it's just Oswin with a funnel, cards which weren't invented yet, but you somehow have them. How? So, in order to survive, you develop a new skill, strategic cowardice. You learn to run fast, duck under carts, hide in barrels, pretend to be a monk. You travel under aliases like the Guzman of Ghent or Friar Tickle, or definitely not the guy who mocked the Duke last week. And when that fails, you beg forgiveness. You kneel before angry nobles and offer humble songs about their generosity. You write impromptu poems praising their sword collection. You dedicate the next puppet show to their mother, even if she smells like herring. Especially if she smells like herring. And sometimes it works. Other times, you spend the night in the stocks with Oswin making sad harmonies on a broken recorder, while children throw moldy fruit at your dignity. But not all noble interactions are bad. Some lords are patrons of the arts. In Bruges, you meet a merchant lord who's obsessed with Greek mythology. He invites you to perform the Fall of Icarus in pantomime. You do it using feathers, a wax candle, and Oswin painted white and hung from a pulley system. It ends in mild injury and a standing ovation. You're paid in coin, wine, and a small dog named Clementine. In Milan, a duchess commissions a private jester show. She watches you perform a satire of court life with barely a smirk, then tips you a ring worth more than your entire wardrobe. Later, her steward warns you that she once had a bard executed for rhyming duchess with crutches. You swallow hard and leave at sunrise. Eventually, you start carrying a short list of emergency backup performances, non-offensive, non-political, delightfully bland routines guaranteed not to offend. The Dance of the Three Turnips. The Mute Bard's Silent Tale of Lost Porridge. Oswin's tragic one-act play, Goose, with no purpose. They're safe. They're boring. They keep your blood inside your body. But when the opportunity does arise to shock, to move, to make an audience cry or scream or fall over laughing, you take it. Carefully. Strategically. And then you run. And as exhausting as it is, there's something exhilarating about it. This tightrope act between celebration and scandal. The constant improvisation. The danger. The applause. The occasional flying cabbage. You live in a world where art can get you killed. But it can also make you immortal. Sort of. No one remembers the man who dug ditches in Avignon. But the tale of Lucien the juggler, who once balanced 12 eggs on his face while singing a dirty limerick about St. Thomas, lives on. You travel from town to town, surviving one story at a time. Tonight, you perform in the market square of a city you can't pronounce. You start with a puppet play about dishonest bakers. The crowd laughs. Then you tell a tale about a knight who defeats a dragon using clever insults and a spoon. The children cheer. The local guards frown. But no one throws a sword. So you win. For now. As you walk away into the night, Oswin clutching his lute sack and whispering sonnets to Clementine the dog, you feel it again, that spark. That thrill. You're not just a performer. You're a survivor. And your stage is the world. You wake up in a monastery. Which sounds pleasant until you realize you're not supposed to be here. You are not a monk. You are not a novice. You are not even an enthusiastic visitor. You're just very, very good at looking inconspicuous when being chased by men with pitchforks. And last night, after a particularly controversial puppet sketch involving a corrupt tax collector, a cow, and a suspiciously bald bishop, you made a daring escape across 3 fences, a leper colony, and into the side door of this holy establishment. So now you're lying on a cot made of wood, prayer, and recycled goat hair, pretending to be asleep while a real monk in a rough wool robe chants matins 5 feet from your head. It's 4 a.m. It's cold. You smell like garlic and regret. But you are safe. Sort of. Because while the monastery isn't exactly thrilled about sheltering street performers, it is considered bad form to beat someone while standing next to a statue of Saint Jerome. So they've let you stay, for now. Provided you make yourself useful, which in monk terms means dig trenches, copy Latin, and please don't juggle in the chapel again. Which brings us to a peculiar and often ignored part of medieval life, the church's very complicated relationship with street performers. It's a bit like a father trying to tolerate his child's avant-garde kazoo phase, equal parts frustration, fear, and reluctant admiration. Let's set the stage. The medieval church was the TikTok algorithm of its time. It dictated everything, from how you dressed, to how you ate, to whether or not Tuesday was a good day to feel joy. Spoiler, it wasn't. Too close to Wednesday. The church loomed over every village, city, and soul like an eternal auditor with an incense addiction. And the general opinion among the holy folk was this: performers equals dangerous nonsense merchants. You were an agent of temptation, a spreader of frivolity, a distraction from God. The holy men of the age had a term for entertainers like you, skura, which loosely translates to that idiot who juggles chickens while people are trying to fast. You were suspected of everything: encouraging lust, spreading heresy, mocking authority, using ventriloquism to house demons and puppets, making the peasants laugh, which, according to some monks, is dangerously close to pride. There's even a delightful 12th century quote from John of Salisbury, a very serious man with very serious eyebrows, who called performers those who defile the soul with obscene spectacles and profane songs. So naturally, you sing louder. But not everyone in the church hated performers. Some clergy, especially the lower ranks, actually liked a good show. Monks, after all, are still humans, and humans are weak. Especially when you show up with a talking goose puppet who recites the Psalms in Latin while wearing a mitre. The key issue was control. If you were performing outside the church, unsupervised, and especially if you made people laugh at the clergy, you were a threat. But if your show was inside the church, approved by the bishop, sanitized of heresy, and preferably about sin and the fiery consequences of lusting after miller's daughters, then congratulations, you were now edutainment. In fact, the church began using performers for moral plays. These were dramatic retellings of Bible stories, complete with costumes, devils, angels, and occasionally deeply confused donkeys. If you were lucky or just desperate enough, you could get hired to play roles in these pageants. The devil, always fun, always booed. Herod, a chance to shout a lot. Judas, awkward ending. Jesus, high risk, high reward. But even here, controversy brewed. Because audiences came for the drama, not the doctrine. And some performers couldn't resist the urge to slip in a joke or two. Why did the Pharisee refuse to tip the innkeeper? Because he had no change of heart. Insert medieval crickets. Sometimes, the plays got so rowdy, so elaborate, that bishops had to remind everyone that the point of the production wasn't entertainment, it was salvation. So while you're scrubbing latrine buckets in the monastery courtyard, consider this: you are part of a centuries-long debate about whether laughter leads to sin or simply makes life bearable. But not all church-related experiences are this calm. Let's talk about flagellants. No, not a fancy dessert. These were groups of religious zealots who believed the Black Death and other unpleasant events, like goat inflation, were punishment from God. Their solution? Walk from town to town, whipping themselves, singing somber hymns, and very loudly judging anyone who looked like they were enjoying things. Which includes you. Because if there's one thing flagellants hate more than syphilis, it's dancing. You once ran into a group in northern France while performing a juggling act with Oswin, who was balancing 2 sausages and a mandolin. A flagellant saw you, shouted, "Repent, ye fools," and tried to beat you with a stick made of spiritual frustration and actual wood. You escaped. Oswin lost a sausage. But the memory lingers. And then there's the story of Saint Gerald of Aurillac, who allegedly once cursed a juggler for performing too close to a reliquary. The juggler's shoes caught fire. Which seems excessive, but in fairness, the juggler was miming the crucifixion using vegetables. So, cause and effect. Yet, despite all this suspicion, something strange happens over time. The church starts absorbing the performers. Some monks learn juggling. Some abbots host feast day plays. Some bishops secretly attend comedy shows dressed as peasants. The line between sacred and profane becomes blurry, and the performer, once reviled, becomes necessary. Because even monks get bored, even priests get lonely, and even saints, in their quiet tombs, probably wouldn't mind a decent puppet show every century or so. So you keep performing. You finish your forced monastery chores. You say thank you. You leave a carved turnip doll behind as a gift. It looks vaguely like St. Francis, if he were melting. And you head out once more into the cold, beautiful, utterly ridiculous medieval world. The next town you visit, they're celebrating a local feast day. You arrive at dusk. There's music, laughter, bread, and a surprisingly enthusiastic man dressed as a sheik. You take a breath. Find your stage, an overturned barrel near the chapel. Oswin sets up his recorder. The children gather. The dogs gather. The bishop pretends not to watch from a window. You raise your hands and begin. The jokes are gentle. The rhymes are clean. The satire, carefully buried in double meanings and vegetable metaphors. But the crowd? They laugh. They clap. They feel something. And as you take a bow, a small coin clinks into your hat. You've earned it. Not just the coin. The moment. The permission to exist. You are a jester, a player, a humble fool in a world of sermons. And tonight, for just a little while, even God seems to be smiling. You wake up in a barrel. Not on a bed made of straw. Not under a cart. Not even in your usual ditch behind the fishmonger's wife's house. No, this time, it's an actual barrel. Wine-stained, haphazardly rolled into a stable after last night's performance, and now filled with your aching body, 2 stale bread rolls, and a chicken that does not belong to you. The chicken seems unimpressed. So do you. Especially because your throat feels like it's been sandpapered by demons, your eyes are sunken, and you just watched your best friend Oswin sneeze so hard his lute cracked. That's right. It's plague season. Again. It's always plague season. Because this is the 14th century. And if you're not bleeding from a mysterious boil, you're probably dodging someone who is. Welcome to the Black Death, your least favorite audience member. Let's talk about what happens when showbiz meets pandemic. Spoiler alert, it's not good for ticket sales. The first thing you notice when the plague rolls in is the smell. Not in a poetic, lavender fields at dusk kind of way. No. We're talking rotting garbage, burning herbs, desperation, and fear sweat. Medieval cities already smelled like sadness marinated in onions. Add pestilence to the mix, and you've got the olfactory experience of being punched in the soul. And of course, everyone blames you. Yes, you. The street performer. Because why wouldn't they? You travel from town to town, telling stories, touching things, making people laugh, the horror, and occasionally sharing your food with stray cats. Clearly, you're a vector of disease. The lepers? Fine. The rats? Not a problem. But a guy in striped tights balancing 3 pine cones while singing about sin? Definitely suspicious. Some towns start banning performers outright. Others offer you plague coins, money dipped in vinegar, thrown from windows by people who don't want to get too close. A few simply chase you away with sticks and strong language. You start changing your act. Less juggling. More dancing at a distance. You make a puppet show where death is a misunderstood lover who just wants people to wash their hands. You perform a comedy sketch where 2 rats argue over whether fleas carry souls. The children laugh. The adults are too busy dying to care. And then comes flagellation fever, part 2. You remember those guys, the ones with whips, chanting hymns, and no sense of rhythm? Yeah, they're back. And this time, they've got bells. Every town you visit, you see them, bleeding, chanting, condemning everyone who dares enjoy things. They hate actors. They hate laughter. They hate music. They hate shoes that look too jaunty. They especially hate you. Because in a world of fear, you are a dangerous thing, a reminder that joy still exists. Even now, even during the Black Death, there's something to smile about. A chicken doing a tiny dance. A song about potatoes. A moment of absurdity that pierces through the doom like a badly tuned harpstring. And for that, you must be stopped. You try to outrun them. But travel's not what it used to be. Roads are empty. Inns are shuttered. Even your usual bribes don't work anymore because everyone's too scared to touch a coin, let alone shake your hand. So you do the unthinkable. you join a quarantine troop. Yes, it's as miserable as it sounds. A bunch of desperate, semi-sick performers locked together in an abandoned barn on the edge of a wheat field, trying to rehearse the merry death of King Harold without sneezing on each other. There's Oswin, of course, now permanently raspy. Matilda the contortionist, who only speaks in rhyming couplets. Gregory the fire-eater, who insists that heat kills the plague. And Agnes the mime, who's having a silent breakdown and communicating solely in interpretive coughing. The food situation? Dire. The hygiene situation? Let's just say your last bath involved a stolen rain barrel and a generous helping of moss. But somehow, miraculously, you keep performing. Not for crowds. Not for coins. But for each other. Every night, by candlelight, you do skits. You tell stories. You mimic the village doctor, more leeches, and Gregory makes tiny explosions with fermented wine fumes and a spoon. It's sad. It's absurd. It's beautiful. Because in the darkest days of the plague, when priests are collapsing in their own pulpits and nobles are fleeing their castles for goat-infested caves, the fool is still telling jokes. Still singing. Still dancing. And slowly, very slowly, things change. The plague burns through the land like a wrathful god with halitosis, but eventually, it moves on. Or dies out. Or gets bored. People return to the streets. Doors open. Markets buzz. There's less screaming. Slightly. And in this fragile, recovering world, something unexpected happens. People want to laugh again. They need it. And suddenly, you are not a threat. You are therapy. You're invited to perform at feast days again. A bishop commissions you to do a shadow play about Saint Roch and the miracle of not dying. A noble hires your troupe to perform at his daughter's wedding and pays in goats and strong wine. You find yourself in a town square, standing before a crowd. It's smaller than before. People are thinner, quieter, changed. But they're here. And they're watching. You clear your throat. And begin. You tell a story about death and a baker. About love in a time of fleas. About how even the worst day still ends with sleep. And they laugh. Softly, at first. Then louder. And someone throws a coin. You pick it up. It's clean. And for the first time in a long, long while, you think maybe the world didn't end. Maybe it just paused. And maybe fools like you helped restart it. You return to the troops wagon. Gregory is asleep in the hay. Agnes is drawing hearts in the dust. Oswin is tuning his lute, his fifth one this year. The moon is full. The chickens are snoring. And you're already writing your next sketch. Because you survived the Black Death. With nothing but wit, willpower, and a surprisingly durable hat. And you're not done yet. Not even close. You wake up with your face stuck to a parchment. This is not new. It's your bedroll. Again, used the night before to cushion your skull after a harrowing journey that involved 2 angry pigs, 1 suspicious bridge toll, and a runaway cart driven by a man who only spoke in proverbs. The parchment in question? A discarded page from a legal decree. You wiped your nose with it. Twice. And now your cheek is covered in ink that once read, in glorious Latin calligraphy, "It is henceforth forbidden for jugglers, fools, acrobats, and heretical mimes to gather within the walls of this town." So, you're breaking the law. Again. Let's talk about that. Because here's the little-known truth of your trade. You, humble bringer of joy and fart jokes, are almost always illegal. It's hard to explain just how much medieval people hated fun. Not the quiet kind, like embroidery or fasting, but visible, joyful, public nonsense that was seen as a threat. So cities across Europe started writing you out of existence. Everywhere you go, there are rules. No performing within the market square without approval from the mayor, bishop, and at least 3 angry guildmasters. No women performing unless disguised as men, married to men, or playing the Virgin Mary. No fire tricks near the wine cellar under pain of hanging, or worse, banishment to the next town over, Swampford. And worst of all, sumptuary laws. Yes, the medieval equivalent of fashion police, but instead of getting a fine, you might lose a limb. These laws were designed to keep people in their proper place. Nobles wear silk. Merchants wear wool. Peasants wear sadness. You wear whatever you can find. A striped tunic made from curtain scraps. A hat with bells stolen from a monastery donkey. Shoes that are technically just stitched together regrets. So the moment you step into town, you're visibly suspicious. The guards look at your clothes and see a rebel. Or worse, an unlicensed entertainer. Which was a real thing. In fact, in 15th century England, there was an official document called a minstrel license. Without one, you could be arrested for performing joy in public without state approval. You tried to get one once. You go to the Guildhall. Wait 5 hours. Fill out a form in triplicate, in Latin. Pay a fee. Wait another week. Perform a test skit about morality and bread prices. And at the end of it all, the guildmaster looks you in the eye and says, "Denied. You rhyme too much." So you keep moving. Some towns tolerate you. Others don't. You start carrying decoy props, items that look like farming tools but double as instruments. A rake becomes a lute. A scythe becomes a dance partner. A dead fish becomes, well, still just a dead fish. But even then, you're still a target. Let's not forget the guilds. The performing guilds, when they exist, are both protection and prison. If you're in one, you're allowed to work under rules, supervision, and a strong sense of artistic uniformity. If you're not in one, you're a rogue, and, oh yes, a rogue. These guilds often hate traveling performers. Because you're free. You don't pay dues. You don't follow choreography. You don't wait 6 months to debut a new bit about Satan's suspicious haircut. You just perform. To the guilds, you're a threat. To the towns, you're a nuisance. To the nobles, you're a curious novelty. And to the law, you are a walking contradiction. Let's take a walk through France. Lovely countryside. Smells like wine and occasionally burning. You pass through a dozen villages. In one, you're welcomed like a hero. In the next, you're arrested for inciting unrest with humorous rhyming. In Rouen, a bailiff gives you 3 options: leave by sunrise, join the military, or marry his sister. You leave by moonlight. His sister throws you a turnip as a goodbye gift. You still have it. It's shaped like a face. But the worst laws? They're the ones you never see coming. Like the time you performed outside a cathedral during Lent. Big mistake. A priest caught your act, an innocent mime of the Last Supper, but with ducks, and promptly had you beaten for mockery of the sacred. You tried to explain the ducks were metaphors. He didn't care. Or the time in Prague when a magistrate accused you of bewitching a cow after it followed you out of town. It wasn't magic. You just smelled like old cheese. Eventually, you start to develop instincts. You read towns like plays. If the guards have feathers in their helmets, avoid satire. If there's a gibbet in the square, avoid everything. If the local noble owns a pet lion, definitely avoid jokes about cats. But despite the danger, you keep going. Because you've seen what the world looks like without laughter. And it's bleak. It's endless toil. Prayer with no pause. Labor with no music. Grief with no release. And somewhere, buried under the mud and manure and plague, is the fragile truth that people need stories. They need someone to poke fun at the absurdity, to remind them that life, even when it's terrifying and unfair, is still theatrical. So, yes, you're illegal, but you're also essential. Which is why, one night, you find yourself performing in secret, behind a tavern, lit only by the moon and the occasional rat. A dozen people huddle in the shadows. A tanner, a baker, 2 monks in disguise. A child with hollow eyes and a smile like dawn. You juggle spoons. You recite a story about a knight who marries a turnip. You pretend to be the local judge and accidentally rule a pig guilty of treason. The laughter is soft, like breath against cold glass. You bow. No applause. No coins. Just a quiet nod from the baker and the offer of a stale roll wrapped in cloth. And then the child speaks. Will you come back tomorrow? You hesitate. Because the guard patrols this area at dusk. Because the baker might be watched. Because your ankle still aches from running last week. Because the law says no. But you smile. And say yes. Because even if you're outlawed 1,000 times, there's something deeper, older, and truer than law, the human need for joy. And tonight, you've broken a law. But you've healed a heart. And somewhere, in the sky above, even the stars seem to twinkle like bells on a jester's cap.